To start, I mean, I did a little bit of searching, so to say, about your background. Google, thanks to Google, we can stalk everybody these days.
Well, I'm easy to stalk on Google. How many people are named Elmira Bey-Rasley?
Hazami Barmada, I have you right there. But in one of the interviews, you'd noted specifically that there was the question, where are you from, that got you interested in a career in the international affairs sector. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. My parents are immigrants from Turkey and came here in the late 1960s. Was born here in New York City and grew up in New York City, but with a name like Elmira Bey-Rasley that's highly Googleable. I always did get the question of where are you from? And that, I think, off the bat, you know, when you say Brooklyn, but then they probe a little further and they say, where are you really from? You are forced to be aware of the greater world. I think the world beyond where you are actually living. And so from the earliest of ages, not only because I would travel to Turkey with my parents as a child, but I also think just interacting with other people who just always made me aware that there was somewhere else that I was from and I should know where this place was and I should understand what this place was. And so from the earliest of ages, I was just always interested in not only what was happening in Turkey, but I think all over the world. So whenever my father brought home the newspaper, I would always look at the international section because automatically it was like, well, what's happening to other places in the world? And certainly when I was going to school, things in Iran were headline news and very aware of what was happening in Iran, Afghanistan. I remember when the Soviet Union was a country and following things like that. So I think just that question just made me aware of the wider world.
It's a very interesting thing that your world is, they're saying that your world is as big as you make it. But I do want to also, I'm known to be somebody who challenges the status quo quite often, not very politically correct for someone who works at the United Nations. I don't know how I've had my job for this long. But debunking stereotypes, I think, is something important. And you get into this with some of the work that you do, both through your your startup, but then also through your writings and various other interviews. And specifically talking about entrepreneurship, and I want to read this so I don't mess up the stat, but the misconceptions that we have about that part of the world, right, versus the US and the more developed countries. But the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor in 2012 showcased that 1 in every 4 startups in the Middle East are actually women-run and women-started, which is 25%. And in Jordan, it's actually about 1/3 of the ecosystem of entrepreneurs is women, compared to Silicon Valley, which is at 3%. And of the privately held companies, 6.5% have female CEOs, and only 1.3% have a female founder. So when we're talking about flipping narratives over on their head, and you are a very great example of an empowered woman, what was it that led you to create your own startup? And tell us more about your startup.
Sure. I'm glad that you cited those stats because when you actually look beyond the United States and you look at the number of not only individuals, but particularly women involved in entrepreneurship, the number is so high. And yet, we seem to believe that everywhere around the world, women need to be empowered and we need to do something to save the women around the world. And I think that's a separate subject that can certainly be covered on another night. I started a nonprofit called Foreign Policy Interrupted. It is a media education platform designed to increase female foreign policy voices. And the genesis of that was, constantly, I'm someone who has been in the foreign policy field for the past 25 years. And I have so many of my friends I know who are foreign policy experts. And yet, whenever I open up the New York Times or you turn on Charlie Rose, you constantly see the same faces. And then when they make these lists up, they're constantly of men. And then what happens is I think there's an outroar where the question is asked, where are the women? And I'm also somebody who I don't want to complain, and I just think that, yes, I think you should be outraged, but I think you should take action. And so having a conversation with my co-founder, Lauren Bond, who's actually, interestingly enough, She's an American based out of Istanbul. I'm the Turk based out of Brooklyn, New York, where we decided that, why don't we dissect what the problem is? And the problem isn't that there aren't women in foreign policy who are qualified enough to actually be on the pages of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or to be on the Sunday talk shows. It's just that traditionally, I think media in the 20th century has been an old white man's game, and it was an institution developed by men. And so in the 24/7 media landscape now, where everything is breaking news and producers and editors are rushing to get out information, they're relying on the Rolodexes of the 20th century. They're relying on what they know. And what they know is a Rolodex of white men. And what we decided to do was kind of break that down and work with the media outlets to flag qualified women, but then also work with the women in order to let them know about, how do you pitch an editor? How do you meet producers? How do you talk to bookers? How do you know that landscape? Because I think, this is a problem that I think women have in startups too. I always get the question of, what's the challenge of women in entrepreneurship? And I think one of the challenges is that women can't raise capital because they're not naturally in those networks where they can raise the capital. I also think that women also I think, I can speak for myself where we want to be perfect. We will only raise our hand when we absolutely know 100% the answer to the question, whereas opposed to a man who, I remember in 2013 during the Gezi Park riots in Turkey, I couldn't believe the number of men who had been to Istanbul once. And they were writing articles about, let me explain to you what's happening in Turkey. And I couldn't believe it. And I thought, well, this is the chutzpah of men, where they're not afraid to raise their hand. And so we need to actually change the mindset of women so that they can raise their hand too. And it's not that they should raise their hand and talk about things that they don't know about. But I actually think the women who are in foreign policy and doing the things they do are so abundantly qualified that we wanted to just make sure that they were going out there and talking about and sharing the things that they know, and not simply because they're women. We're not doing this because, we think that we're, these female activists. I mean, certainly there's a feminist quality about this, but I think Lauren and I are also just two people who care about foreign policy. And when you look around the world, there are so many challenges that are happening at such a rapid clip that the State Department can't possibly handle all of those things on its own. And I just think that the more different opinions and perspectives and ideas that you have, then you're going to have better solutions for it. And you're going to have people out there who are going to be able to solve all these global challenges, because the challenge is no longer a bipolar world, right? Now you have pandemics and cybersecurity and a lot of countries who have gained in economic power, and a lot of complicated issues that are no longer confined to the oak-paneled rooms that men used to once close the doors and define the policy. Policy is not being made in those rarefied halls anymore. It's being made in Tahrir Square. It's being made on the front lines, and it's changing every day. It's being made out in Silicon Valley. Whether that's good or bad, I think that's a separate subject, but the reality is you need these different perspectives and people who are doing the different things to be involved in the policy, because it's changing so rapidly.
Absolutely. I think you bring up some very complex and very timely points. But I do want to go back to the women's issue, because I think it's a critical one. And we know that women's involvement in politics globally has doubled in the past 10 years, but it's still at 22%. What could we do to empower more women to go into politics? And what do you think the biggest barriers are, not only for entry, but for the kind of enticing young women to go into that sector?
I don't think you have to entice them. I think if the opportunities are there, I think they're ready to take them. And I've just in my work with the State Department, but then also just writing this book, I've traveled to, several dozen countries and talking to both young men and women. The women are as equally as interested in doing different things, but also very globally aware. And I think the challenge is to really, literally, take a term from, entrepreneurship in the startup world, to disrupt the status quo. And to really change the mind frame of what women can be involved in, and bringing their voices to the table and having them participate. I think there's no lack of organizations that try to support women and try to get them to be interested, whether it's in technology or in foreign policy or in politics. I think where the challenge does lie is really at the top. I think you really need to have leaders who own this issue and who say, I really want to make a change in this. I think you've seen a lot of changes here in the United States whether it's the President of the United States or whether it's a CEO that actually takes diversity and inclusion really seriously. And it has to happen in both. You have to have people moving up, but you also have to have a change at the top. And so the disruption doesn't need to happen through a mass revolution with people storming the White House. But I think that the people at the White House I think there's an opportunity for them to change their mindset. I was working for Madeleine Albright in the early 90s. When they had the 96 elections, and Bill Clinton appointed her to be the first Secretary of State. And you look back at it now and it might not seem like, so what, there was a female Secretary of State, but even in 1996, it was a big deal to appoint a woman to that position. She got questions of, how are you going to deal with world leaders in the Middle East? And that turned out not to be an issue. I mean, people respected her for the position that she was in, and she was perfectly capable of doing that. And so I think it's about shattering the stereotypes and just not acknowledging them and just kind of moving forward with them.
But a part of that is also very much societally ingrained. I see a lot of that with young women that are very confused as to what route to go down. There's obviously policies that impact some choices of some females into entering different fields, issues of maternity leave, all these various things. So there are policy issues, but I want to ask you your opinion about the societal norms that need to be shattered, and how can we do that? And how can we actually empower young women to say, no, this is the career I would like to take? Where can we find those support systems where they don't exist, where ecosystems do not exist? And there's ample examples of those lacks of ecosystem globally.
Well, I mean, certainly sign up for our newsletter at Foreign Policy Interrupted. And we have a fellowship. We're taking applications for a fellowship program where we actually address this issue of trying to encourage more women to raise their hands and put out op-eds and get themselves on television. I think the barrier there is, again, like, women just don't have the networks. And then also, I think there is this mindset of, what do I do when I get up there? And so we ran our first fellowship program, and it was so interesting to hear the women and what challenges they faced, because all of them were so amazingly, we had a cybersecurity expert, a woman who does defense in China defense matters, and yet, they asked this question. They said, I don't know what to do with my hands, and I'm so energetic, and I don't know what to do with my enthusiasm. And I said, there's nothing that you can do. You should harness it. People should just be who they are, and I think we need to shatter the mindset that there's only one way to be on television. I think when we start to accept people as they are and listen to the substance that they're delivering, I think that's a value added. And so one of the reasons that we set up Foreign Policy Interrupted is to provide that kind of service for women. But I also think another important thing is to highlight the examples of women. We're inspired by the stories and the role models that we're exposed to. And there's a reason that a lot of young men in the United States want to be entrepreneurs, because a lot of the entrepreneurial stories in the United States are about Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Michael Dell. Well, where are the stories about the women, the female entrepreneurs? And I think that the magazines and the newspapers that actually devote the time to actually talk about those stories make a difference. Because when you actually are reading about someone or actually seeing them on television, psychologically, there's a mind shift where you think, oh, there's a woman who's doing things in cybersecurity. Maybe I can do that too. And it just takes that one individual to be able to break that path. But I think it's up to the media too to actually highlight those examples and not just the ones where you're talking about the Facebooks and the Googles.
Absolutely. To ask one last question before we open it up to Q&A, what has been your biggest obstacle and how did you overcome it?
It's interesting. When we started Foreign Policy Interrupted, and when I set out to do my book, I'm so excited, like we're going to go and do this, and I had this one opportunity where a producer from a major television show called up, and she said, "We love what you're doing with Foreign Policy Interrupted, and we want to embrace, we want to have more women on our show. Could you recommend someone who knows about Turkey?" And I kind of sat there and I was just like, well, I kind of started this organization. Maybe I should volunteer myself. But I actually had to stop and I thought, well, like, who am I? Like, I can't possibly, like, why? I can't possibly go. I'm not qualified to do that. And this own psychology that I think society has, conditioned a lot of women to believe that, you have to have a PhD or you have to have written 5 books in order to actually go out there and talk about these things. And so I stopped and I said, okay, I started this organization precisely because we have this problem where women don't raise their hands, so you have to raise your hand. And I said, yes, me. But I had to overcome that obstacle of, can I actually do this? And it was the same. I think it was the same thing that I encountered when I went out to write my book. It was a long process. It took me about 5 years, and along the way, not only starting out, but also just along the way, even trying to finish and get over the finishing line. It was always this question of, can I actually do this? And happily, the answer is yes.
And thanks for doing it.
Happily, the answer is yes, but I think that because there aren't a lot of examples out there, and just the networks that you're in, I think just the psychological obstacle that I had created in my own head to believe that I wasn't good enough to do it, I just had to overcome that, and I'm happy that I've actually put that aside. And now when I actually talk to editors and producers, they're like, oh no, like Elmira's calling, and she has no shame whatsoever.
Recently, Great Britain is planning to pass a legislation, and I think it's in the parliament, where it's in the financial sector, the bonuses for upper level management will be tied to number of women they have in their boards and upper executive level. Do you think legislation should be brought in? Should be this kind of like brute force legislation will be helpful? What's your thoughts about this?
My thought on just legislation in general, I think overregulation is a bad thing, and especially after spending so much time talking to entrepreneurs. I think the less government and less complications that you have, the better it is. I do think that there is merit in creating quotas and working with corporations to actually require them to have a certain number of women and minorities on their boards, because I think that's the only way you create opportunity and you create change. And quotas may seem, I know it's a controversial thing, but it is a disruptor. And it does bring people into a group of networks that they otherwise might not have access to. And if there's one thing that I took away from writing my book, it's, success is really tied to who you know. It absolutely depends on what you know and the substance that you bring, but it's also about the networks that you are operating in. And so at every opportunity I get, advice that, young women come to me, and I always say, go out there and talk to people, ask them to go to coffee and ask them questions and ask them if they will talk to you, because you need to build your network. And I think that creating quotas in a boardroom is actually a really good thing, because unfortunately I think that there are still people who have outdated notions about the capability of people who don't look like them and who are not within their circles. And once you actually bring those people into contact with people who are not like them, I think magical things happen, and that's how you actually change mindsets.
You wrote in 2012, Ancient Days, about a challenge and the distinction between micro enterprise and microfinance and entrepreneurship, and the need to draw a clearer distinction between the role of each. Do you still feel that that's an issue? And in what context do you think that one plays the most important role, and in what context do you think entrepreneurship plays the most important role?
Sure. That was a piece I actually went and I found the very first microfinance recipient. He was in Bogota, Colombia. Opportunity International extended the very first microfinance loan in 1971. It was not Muhammad Yunus. Muhammad Yunus started the Grameen Bank in 1973, 2 years later. And I went to go visit Carlos just because I wanted to, no one had written about his story before, and I wanted to understand like what inspired him to become an entrepreneur. And I sat down with him and he said, "Oh, I'm not an entrepreneur." He had grown up in Colombia, which is a predominantly Catholic country, and he'd become an evangelical. And he wanted to start Colombia's first evangelical church. And he said, I became an entrepreneur because, no one would give me money, and I needed to raise the money to create this church. And we talked a lot about microfinance and the phenomenon of that. And when I went and researched it a little more, I did realize, and one of the reasons I wanted to write that piece is because I think it's the organizations and a lot of government bodies that have associated microfinance with entrepreneurship. Let's support these individuals, they're entrepreneurs, and let's do these things because they're working in development. And I think it's great that the World Bank and USAID and the UN and all of these bodies are focused on entrepreneurship. I think that's absolutely essential, and I think that they should be involved in that. But I wanted to write that piece to take a step back, because people who are getting microfinance loans and just setting up a small storefront, they're not necessarily trying to be globally competitive. And it's a different type of an entrepreneur from someone who, say, wants to actually create a mobile money app. I just actually wrote today about a great entrepreneur in Egypt who created a jobs website, but very different from LinkedIn, really catering, working with the universities in Egypt and meeting that need. These microfinance recipients are really just trying to get by and create an opportunity for themselves. And so I wanted to make that distinction because I think the danger in calling all of these people entrepreneurs is that we say, oh, we've given them a loan, they started their business, but then there's no follow-up. So my question is always, where's the macro finance? And what I think a lot of the countries around the world have the challenge is, if you want to get a small loan, there's certainly microfinance, but there's also ways to get it through friends and family and through other mechanisms. But I think the challenge comes in is if you are an entrepreneur, and one of the reasons that I think a lot of entrepreneurs around the world don't scale up is because they don't have that middle financing and they don't have that large scale financing. And so I wrote that piece primarily not targeted to dismiss anyone who is taking a microfinance loan and starting an enterprise. I applaud those people, and we should continue to support them. I think where I have a problem is with the big organizations, and they wash their hands and they say, okay, well, this is it, and we've solved this problem. You haven't solved the problem. You have just chipped away at the ground floor, and now you need to really go in because there is a lot more that needs to be done. And you need to actually think about the financial mechanisms that are required to actually lift these entrepreneurs up and then provide them the skills to do it.
What do you think the role of the US government internationally should be with regard to international trade and free trade in particular? If it wants to promote entrepreneurship abroad, what should the policies be? The mobile industry in China and Taiwan is extremely well developed because they have put in place blocks so that international corporations, international companies cannot go into that market and destroy but burgeoning young entrepreneurial tech startups, for example.
I'm definitely very pro free trade. I think that open borders, open trade policies, it's a benefit. I don't think you benefit from closing anything. And yes, China has done that, but there is a question of how much China will grow. And I think China is actually incurring that question right now. So you have all of these billion-dollar companies in China that are only selling in China. What happens when those companies actually want to go global? Is the quality the same? Are they up to global standards? How are they actually gonna go overseas? And I think the Chinese are actually thinking about those questions. And so there's a flip side of that coin where you can actually grow in your market, but then how do you test that out when you go overseas? Before coming here, I sat down with someone from Uber and talked about how the company was evolving. And it was interesting to hear him talk about how they take ideas from the places where they rolled out Uber, where he was talking about an interesting model that they took from Nairobi, Kenya, and applying it here in the United States. And I think where you're seeing, I think one of the reasons the Silicon Valley is iterating and progressing so fast is because Silicon Valley is open. Right? Silicon Valley accepts ideas from all over the place. It accepts people from all over the place. In fact, Silicon Valley encourages immigration and wants more people from around the world to come to Silicon Valley to work out on their ideas and to share those ideas. And I think where you have that vibrancy is where you're actually going to have innovation.
Can we give a round of applause to
Thank
our
you.
wonderful
Thank you
host,
for coming.
wonderful Almira.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.